I'm Dr. Amir Rashidian, founder of the Mid Atlantic Chiropractic Center. When I was 9 years old is when I decided I had to become a doctor. The reason for that was because my dad and I were traveling through these remote villages in Iran in the foothills of the Elborz mountain range. And just if you can imagine the most beautiful green scenery in the mountains. And these villages had no plumbing, no power lines, no motorized vehicles. And as my dad and I were just observing, a woman went into labor. She was in tremendous pain. Something was wrong. No one knew what to do. And a midwife finally walked over. She knelt down and listened and examined her for a few minutes and stood up, said, "I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. There's no heartbeat. The baby's not alive, and this lady's not gonna make it." Everyone who was standing around, one by one, they just put their head down and started to leave. And they were leaving her to say goodbye, basically, to her husband. Her husband was right there. He just collapsed, fell to his knees, started crying. We were just about to start a family. How could this be? And I was looking into the eyes of this young woman who was just told she won't be alive another couple hours. And I started to have this panic attack where, you know, your throat gets all choked up and you feel pressure on your chest. I was having trouble catching my breath and tears are just coming down. And my dad saw me in that state. He picked me up, he held me, he carried me out of there, and he calmed me down. And then the two of us climbed down the mountain to get in our car to drive home. And on the drive home, I said, "Dad, I don't want to feel like that ever again." Like what? You know, like helpless. Like I can't do something to help. And Dad asked me what I was going to do about it. And I said, "I'm going to go be a doctor. I'll be the surgeon that everyone needs. I'll be the best surgeon in the whole world, carry my bag with me everywhere I go, and I'm just going to save lives." 10 years passed. I was a student at George Washington University, 19 years old at this time, and I went home for Christmas break, and our home was now in Gaithersburg, Maryland. I walked in the door, and my dad had this big, thick, white neck brace on, and he couldn't lift his arms to give me a hug. He was limp from the shoulders down. He was definitely under the influence of some serious painkillers. And so we spent my Christmas break, those 6 weeks or so, going from doctor to doctor trying to figure out what is wrong with my dad. And every doctor we go to said, no, this is beyond my scope. You need to go to this other doctor. Finally, we ended up in a neurosurgeon's office. And the neurosurgeon took a look at Dad's MRIs and x-rays and said, "You've got these massive bone spurs growing into the spinal canal, pressing on the spinal cord, and it's choking the life that flows from your brain to the rest of your body. Unless we find a way to decompress, this will not end well. You're gonna need surgery." Dad didn't want to have surgery. He was scared of surgery. So we decided to get a second and a third opinion. Well, all three neurosurgeons that we met with said the same thing. Their bone spurs, degeneration, spinal cord is being compressed, and you won't live unless we get the pressure off. Dad asked, "What are you gonna do?" I said, "Well, you know, normal neck surgery is done through the front, but not with you. We're gonna open up the whole neck in the back. We're gonna break and remove the bones in the back of your spine, take pressure off the spinal cord. We'll put these rods on the sides. We'll screw them into your spine. We'll fuse your whole neck. You'll never turn your head again. You may not regain function of your hands, but we're hoping you'll have less pain. And by the way, there's a good chance you'll die under the knife because you're old." Dad was 70 at the time, and it's not really the number. There's such a thing as a young 70 and an old 70. He was the old 70, so it's not about the number. But the fact that is, he's already losing his life, but now we have to risk it to see if we can get some of that back. And if he can't use his hands, well, Dad had a passion. He had a hobby. He loved writing. He always wrote jokes and letters and poems and stories, and he liked to write letters to the president. President of the U.S. got a letter from my dad. I don't know if he ever read it, but got a letter from my dad about every month. But Dad couldn't use his hands. He can't dress himself. He can't feed himself. He can't write. He can't work, and he basically had to sit in a chair. We left that third neurosurgeon, got in a taxi to go home. And I'm in the back of the taxi holding all the x-rays and MRIs and CTs and medical. Now they come on a disc, you know, but, you know, 23 years ago, that was heavy stuff. And I'm sitting there, I looked over at my dad with his neck brace, and he was cringing because every bump that taxi hit was sending a bolt of pain through his entire body. Looking in his eyes, I could tell he wished he was dead. And emotionally, I got transported right back to that village where I saw the woman die in her husband's arms, and no one could help. And I'm watching my own dad die in front of me. The taxi driver saw me get all teary-eyed and choked up, and I'm having the same feelings of having trouble breathing. So he said, I noticed you're in a lot of pain, talking to my dad. And I know you asked me to take you home, but there's this chiropractor right down the street. Why don't you let me take you there? I was a 19-year-old know-it-all, so I said, absolutely not. Dad, he was afraid of the surgery. He said, why not? Let's go. Let's check it out. So we showed up to this chiropractor's office. Long story short, the place was under construction. There was framing, but there were no walls. There was a crew putting up drywall, but there were no rooms. There was no floor. It was concrete. We walked in. I'm thinking we should grab that taxi before he leaves. The chiropractor came around. Nice guy, introduced himself, brought a view box, a light box, plugged it into the wall, started reading all the MRIs that I'd carried in. And after looking at the MRIs, he told my dad, you've got these bone spurs that are growing into the spinal canal, pressing on the spinal cord, and it's choking the life that flows from your brain to the rest of your body. Unless we find a way to decompress, this will not end well. And I started to gain a little bit of respect for him. Told my dad, you're gonna need to get adjusted. It's gonna take you a long time to get better, but if you don't wanna have surgery, this is your alternative. And it may not be an easy road. What do you wanna do? Dad said, I'm gonna give it a shot. So he went there for 6 months. At the end of those 6 months, my dad walked in that office. By now the construction's done. The office was beautiful, chairs and a reception counter, a nice wood floor, and there was a receptionist right behind the counter. And every chair had a patient in it. The office was packed. And my dad walked in the door, walked up to the counter, picked up the pen to sign his name on the sign-in sheet. It was the first time he could write again. He was so proud of himself. He held the pen over his head. He started walking back and forth, showing everybody that he could do that. Everybody in the room started to smile or laugh. Who's this old guy holding the pen over his head? But the receptionist behind the counter, she cried. Because every time my dad would walk in there, she had to write his name for him. Or she would help him and hold his hand, try to help him write, and he would drop the pen. And he would get so frustrated. But that day and every day after that, Dad was writing again, and he was able to do everything he needed to do. In fact, the president started getting letters from my dad all over again after a year hiatus. Dad lived to be 88. Lived to be 88 years old. At 88, he was younger than when he was 70. He'd get up in the morning, exercise, go out the door, visit his friends. They're all in nursing homes, but not my dad. He was driving himself, living a good life, traveling across the country and abroad, really enjoying himself. He lived long enough to stand right next to me as my best man when I got married. And he lived long enough to meet my first son when he was born. So, I get really passionate when it comes to health and healing, especially in natural healing of the human body, because when you think about it, when my dad was sick and when he was suffering, when he was hurting, he wasn't the only one who suffered. Everyone who cared about him suffered. Everyone who loved him got affected by it. And my point is, it's not just about you. It's about everyone who cares about you. If you take the time to take care of your health, to not suffer like he did, you're actually protecting your family members and your loved ones from suffering as well. Health is the most valuable thing you have. It's the most important thing you have. It's worth the investment of time, energy, resources. We have to do, not for us, but for the people we care about.